Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be a moderator for this session with the world-renowned panelists. As you can see, the global economy is now entering its 9th year after global financial crisis. However, the return to robust economic growth remains elusive. The IMF forecast that this year it will grow 3.1% and next year 3.4%. The growth still remains subdued, and perhaps when IMF chief Lagarde mentioned very nicely that global growth rate has been too low for too long and for too few people. Not only that, there are warning signals everywhere. There is a Brexit in Europe, China's slowdown, collapse of the commodity prices, and trade volume as well. And as if that's not enough, there are also geopolitical risks everywhere. IS, Syria, and we also have nuclear missiles in North Korea. So there are all these warning signals everywhere that will destabilize the global economy. And perhaps more worrisome than all these risk factors is a widespread backlash against globalization. There's an ugly nationalism rearing up its head again. And there's, as you can see in this presidential debate among the candidates in the US, all this talk is not quite inspiring in terms of the trade liberalization. So the big question is that among all these risk factors, where will the global economy is headed for? Will this new normal continue? Or are you at the entrance of another big recession? So for this, we'll hear from the global experts. And as for China, we'll have a panelist, Professor Chen Ji-woo from Yale University. He's a leading expert on China's economy and financial market. So let's hear from the Professor Chen, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. I just want to spend a few minutes on focused on China. I want to mention 3 points. First, unavoidably, China is going through this convergence process from a very high growth rate to a more normal growth rate, maybe 3 to 4%. To a large extent, I think if 10 years from now, China can maintain a 3 to 4% growth rate, that would be a remarkable achievement, because I really think some crisis in the next few years is very, very tough to avoid. So there is this convergence to a normal speed. My second point is what is going to happen in the next couple of years to the Chinese economy and also in the realm of policy making in China. As many of you may have read, the 19th Party Congress is going to take place next year, probably in October or November 2017. For the Chinese economy, as well as other things, the political economy perspective is very, very fundamentally important, especially at this juncture. So what this means is, because the 19th Party Congress has so much at stake, many, many key things, including personnel appointments and transitional plans for who will be the new leader after President Xi Jinping and so on. All of those things have to be more or less determined at the 19th Party Congress. So for this reason, maintaining economic stability in the next year and a half, all the way until roughly March 2018, is really absolutely job number one. So for this reason, they will do whatever it takes to maintain a growth rate probably around 6.5%. So this is very, very important to keep in mind, because even though we know that further efforts by the government through monetary policy stimulation or fiscal stimulation would definitely create and accumulate more structural imbalances. Still, they will keep going at whatever cost because of the political stakes that are in place. So this is my second point. My last point is that there are three major bubbles that are there, and the international media have focused on pretty much. The first bubble is the debt bubble. So almost everyone has seen the rising debt to GDP ratio for China. So overall, the debt to GDP ratio is close to 2.7 to 2.8 times Chinese GDP. And this level has been reached mainly over the last 7 to 8 years, especially after the 2008 financial crisis. The second bubble is the real estate bubble. This housing bubble has been expanding at a very, very high pace, especially over the last 8 months to 3 months. For this year, in August and September, so many people have been crying because they have waited in line to buy a new flat, but could not get a chance, even though they had so much cash in their pockets, trying to really get the first chance to buy, the fast rising flats in Beijing and other tier 1 and tier 2 cities in China. So there's no question what we are seeing in China is a repeat of the stock market bubble that bursted back in June 2015. Because now even if you look at some of the statistics, for the last 3 months, more than 70% of the new loans by banks have been used to buy new homes. So mortgage financing now occupies more than 70% of the new loans issued by the banks. That was unheard of. Even a year ago, you would not see so many households trying to use leverage to buy homes. But there is now this big rush to buy as many apartments as you can get. And then the third bubble is the renminbi bubble. So as I know, the U.S. Presidential candidates and others have been still, especially Trump, still thinks the renminbi has been artificially kept at a low exchange rate in order to gain more export advantage by China. But in reality, the renminbi is way overvalued. So there should have been more depreciation of the renminbi. But since Chinese economists have done such a good job to basically over-politicize the renminbi, the currency, and the exchange rate, so as a result, the Chinese leadership has really accepted this view that letting the renminbi depreciate is equivalent to letting the Chinese nation go in disgrace. And so somehow maintaining the exchange rate is also political job number one. So what is going to happen to any of the or all of the three bubbles, the debt bubble, the real estate bubble, and then the renminbi exchange rate bubble? There has been a lot of debate among economists and policymakers. Personally, I think the debt bubble is probably unlikely to burst first, mainly because we all know, debt may not be a problem if the authorities can have the power to force the lenders not to get serious on the debt contracts, on the obligations that the borrowers have to make payments. So in other words, you can have insolvencies by many borrowers, but as long as the government says you cannot force I mean, the lenders cannot force the borrowers to make payments, then they can stay on for quite a while. So one crucial condition to watch for is the Chinese government fiscal condition. As long as the fiscal conditions are okay, then the banks can be forced to accept the non-performing assets, and also the banks cannot force payments or force bankruptcy on the borrowers. So in the end, as long as the fiscal conditions are okay, and given that all the banks are more or less owned by the central government and local governments, so that bubble may not become an immediate financial crisis anytime soon. So in the end, I think the real estate bubble, the housing bubble, is really where the potential problem can really occur. For many different reasons, the housing bubble is so important, not just to the financial system, to the policymakers, but also to all the local governments, as well as to the investment-driven economic growth model for China. So all of these things now depend so much on the housing market bubble continuing. And as far as I can see at this point, even though policymakers in the last few weeks have tried hard to make the housing bubble more contained, but deep inside all the policymakers' minds, they're not really serious to really correct this bubble because so much depends on it. And so let's watch how this game will continue. So I should stop here. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, as you have heard, Professor Chen just warned us about the potential bubble burst in China. And he said renminbi is overvalued for political reasons. But actually, one of the currencies that has fluctuated very widely recently has been Japanese yen. And for that, we are very lucky to have Professor Sakakibara, a former vice minister for international finance in Japan's Ministry of Finance, but he's better known as Mr. Yen. So Professor Sakakibara, please.
Okay. I'd like to touch on the current condition of the world economy. I am somewhat worried about the current condition of the world economy, what Lawrence Summers of Harvard University once called secular stagnation may have started to take place. Rapid decline in commodity prices has hit the countries like Brazil and Russia. Their GDP declined last year by more than 3%, and the recovery there is not really that robust. So there are some trouble spots in the world economy, which is not being remedied at this moment. International organizations like IMF or European Central Bank needs to sort of give helping hands, but it seems that the situation is somewhat difficult. I am a little bit worried about the Chinese economy as well. China is now moving from high growth period to stable growth period. Japan experienced that for 40 years ago, and the transition is not necessarily that easy. So that how Chinese economy would move to lesser growth rate period is something which needs to be watchful for the next several years. With regards to Japan, Bank of Japan has implemented aggressive easing of monetary policy in the March of 2013, and it did work. It resulted in depreciation of the currency toward $1, $1.20, and it rose the equity prices by as much as 60%. But now, easing of the monetary policy has come to a sort of an end, although they are still easing. The impact is weakening. So the question now is what's next? And there are calls for fiscal stimulus, but given the accumulated fiscal deficit of Japan, which is 240% of the GDP, temporary relief from the fiscal side is possible, but continuous stimulus from the fiscal side is very difficult. So that question about the Japanese economy is, what is next? After aggressive easing of the monetary policy. Thank you.
The World Knowledge Forum